The three men were gone. Nobody had watched them leave because nobody had been watching them to begin with. They had simply ceased to be present the way people do when a situation removes all the conditions that made their presence feel possible. Mike and Frank walked 6 blocks north through the late afternoon Manhattan light. They did not talk much. Frank asked Mike once if he was who he thought he was, and Mike said yes. Frank said he had watched him fight, and Mike said, "Thank you." They walked the rest of the way in the comfortable silence of two people who do not need to fill space with words. At Frank's building, Frank stopped at the entrance. "I want you to know something," Frank said. He was looking at Mike with the directness of a man who has spent his life meaning what he says. "I've seen a lot of things in my life. I've had people help me and people not help me. What you did today was not about you being who you are. Most people in that situation, most people with what you have, they would have kept walking. They would have told themselves it wasn't their business. You didn't." Mike shrugged slightly. "It was somebody's business." Frank nodded. "That's the thing. Most people don't see it that way." He went inside. Mike walked back the way he had come, back to his car, back to whatever the rest of his afternoon held. He had not thrown a punch, had not raised his voice, had not made a threat or a gesture or anything that could be reported, documented, or described as a confrontation. He had said 2 words, "Pick it up," and waited. And the geometry of the situation had rearranged itself around those 2 words, the way geometry always rearranges itself when someone with genuine authority enters a space and simply states what should happen. The 3 men went home that evening and did not talk about what happened, not because they were ashamed, though some part of each of them was, but because there was no version of the story that they wanted to tell. What had happened to them was not dramatic. Nobody had threatened them. Nobody had touched them. They had simply been in the presence of someone for whom their behavior was not acceptable, and that presence alone had been enough to make it stop. That is a particular kind of power, rarer than strength, harder to explain than speed or technique. The power of someone whose standards for what is acceptable are so clear and so settled inside them that merely being present communicates those standards to everyone around them without a word needing to be said. Mike Tyson had spent his entire life building that kind of presence in gyms, in rings, in prison yards, in nightclubs, on sidewalks. The specific gravity of someone who knows exactly who he is and what he will and will not walk past. He walked past a lot of things in New York City. He had seen things his whole life that he could not stop, situations that were not his to enter, moments that belonged to other people and their choices and their consequences. But an old man's groceries on the sidewalk, 3 men laughing, 50 people walking by. That was not something he was going to walk past. He said 2 words. He waited. He walked an old man home. And Frank DELANEY made it back to his apartment with what was left of his groceries on a Tuesday afternoon, the same as every other Tuesday, and sat down at his kitchen table and thought for a long time about what it means when someone decides that something is their business. That is the story. 2 words, 6 blocks, no punches thrown, no names taken, no headlines. Just a man who saw something wrong and decided it was his business to stop it. And 3 men who went home knowing, for the first time in a long time, what it felt like to be on the other side of that decision. What Mike saw from half a block away on that Manhattan sidewalk was not ambiguous. 3 men surrounding one old man, bags on the ground, laughter. No threat of violence, not that kind of situation, but something crueler in its own way, the specific entertainment of people who have decided that someone's dignity is available for their amusement. Mike had seen this before. Not exactly this, but the shape of it, the geometry of it. 3 against 1, where the 1 has no recourse and the 3 know it. He had been on both sides of that geometry when he was younger, and the understanding of it lived in him the way only things you have lived inside you can. He did not quicken his pace, did not start running, did not make a show of urgency that would announce his arrival and give the 3 men time to recalibrate. He simply continued walking at the same pace, the same direction, and within 30 seconds, he was there. He stopped 4 feet from the nearest man. "Pick it up," Mike said. His voice was not raised, it was not aggressive, it was not the voice of a confrontation, not the escalating volume of someone who wants a fight. It was the voice of a statement, simple, flat, complete. The voice of someone who has said exactly what he means and has nothing to add to it. The 3 men turned. The first one was in his late 20s, heavy-set, wearing a red hoodie. He looked at Mike the way people look at someone who has just interrupted something they were enjoying. Then, recognition arrived. Slowly at first, then all at once. His expression went through several stages in about 2 seconds. The second man recognized Mike at the same moment. He took an involuntary step backward, not a dramatic step, just the step a body takes when a threat assessment completes itself faster than the conscious mind can process it. The third man had not yet looked up. He was still laughing at something, looking down at the spilled groceries. He said, "Who is this guy telling us to?" And then he looked up. He did not finish the sentence. Mike was not in a fighting stance, was not clenching his fists, was not doing any of the things that signal physical aggression. He was simply standing there, 4 feet away, looking at the 3 of them with an expression that was not angry, not threatening, not performing anything at all. It was the expression of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the other people in the situation to make theirs. Before we continue, drop your thoughts in the comments right now. 3 men have just turned around to find Mike Tyson standing 4 feet away, telling them to pick up an old man's groceries. What do you think happens next? Now, back to the story. The first man in the red hoodie was the one who spoke. His voice had lost the casual confidence it had carried 30 seconds ago when he was kicking milk cartons. "We were just messing around," he said. Mike said nothing, just looked at him. "It wasn't serious," the man said. Mike looked at him for another moment. Then he looked down at the oranges in the gutter, the split milk carton, the bread in the puddle. Then back at the man. The man in the red hoodie looked at the groceries, then at Mike, then at the groceries again. He bent down and picked up an orange. The second man, without being asked, picked up the bread. The third man retrieved the milk carton, which was mostly empty now, and held it with the expression of someone who is not sure what to do with it, but understands that holding it is better than putting it down. They set what they had recovered beside Frank DELANEY's feet, not making eye contact with the old man, not making eye contact with Mike, not making eye contact with each other. Mike looked at them for one more moment. Then, without another word, he turned to Frank. "You all right?" Mike asked. Frank DELANEY looked at Mike Tyson standing on his sidewalk on a Tuesday afternoon in Manhattan and found that he could not immediately locate his voice. He had been a soldier. He had been in situations that would have broken most people. He was not a man who was easily moved. But something about what had just happened, the speed of it, the completeness of it, the fact that someone had simply stopped and said 2 words and changed everything. Something about that reached him in a way he had not expected. "I'm all right," Frank said. His voice was steady. "Thank you." Mike nodded. He looked at the damaged groceries at Frank's feet. The milk was gone. The bread was probably ruined. 2 of the oranges were in the gutter. "Which way are you headed?" Mike asked. Frank pointed north. 6 blocks. I'm fine, really." "I'll walk with you," Mike said. Not an offer, not a question, just a statement of what was going to happen next. Manhattan, mid-2000s. An elderly veteran was walking home from the grocery store when 3 men surrounded him, knocked his bags to the ground, and started laughing. Dozens of people walked past. Nobody stopped. Nobody said a word. Then Mike Tyson, walking back from a meeting 2 blocks away, turned the corner and saw what was happening. What he did next took less than 60 seconds. The 3 men ran. The veteran got home safely. And the story has never been told publicly until now. The grocery bags hit the sidewalk before the old man could catch them. Oranges rolled into the gutter. A carton of milk split open at the seam, spreading white across the gray pavement. A loaf of bread landed in a puddle. and 3 men stood over Frank DELANEY, 71 years old, United States Army veteran, and laughed. Not quietly, not nervously. Openly, looking around at the passing pedestrians, daring anyone to say something. Nobody did. 40, maybe 50 people walked past in the next 30 seconds. Eyes forward, pace unchanged, the particular New York skill of seeing everything and acknowledging nothing. A woman with a stroller crossed to the other side of the street. A man in a business suit checked his watch. A delivery cyclist pedaled around the spilled groceries without slowing down. Frank stood on that sidewalk in the late afternoon light with his empty hands at his sides and looked at what was left of his groceries and said nothing because there was nothing to say. He was 71 years old. He had served 2 tours in Vietnam. He had come home in 1972 and spent the next 3 decades working, raising a family, living quietly in the same apartment in Upper Manhattan where he had lived since 1981. Every Tuesday afternoon, he walked 6 blocks to the grocery store and 6 blocks back. It was the kind of routine that becomes important when you get older, not because of the groceries, but because of the walking, the purpose, the proof that you can still do it. He had been doing it every Tuesday for 23 years. This was not going to be the Tuesday that stopped him. But right now, in this moment, with 3 men laughing at him and his oranges in the gutter and 50 people walking past, Frank DELANEY was simply trying to hold himself together in the way that people who have survived real things learn to hold themselves together in the face of small things. He bent down slowly to pick up what he could save. That was when the first man kicked the milk carton, not accidentally, deliberately, with the specific casual cruelty of someone who wants to see what happens when you take something away from a person who is already down. The carton skidded 6 feet across the pavement. The second man picked up one of the oranges, looked at it for a moment, then threw it across the street. The third man said something that made the other 2 laugh harder. Mike Tyson turned the corner at that exact moment. He had been walking back from a meeting in Midtown, 2 blocks north, taking the long way back to his car because the afternoon was clear and he was in no particular hurry. He was wearing dark jeans, a gray sweatshirt, a baseball cap pulled low. No security, no entourage. Just a man walking through his city on a clear afternoon. He saw it from half a block away. And if you want more untold stories like this one, the ones that never made headlines, never made the news, never went anywhere except through the people who were there, subscribe right now and hit the bell. We post every single day. Now, to understand what Mike Tyson did when he saw what was happening to Frank DELANEY on that Manhattan sidewalk, you need to understand something about where Mike came from and what that does to a person's ability to recognize a specific kind of situation. Mike Tyson grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Not the Brownsville of television and movies, sanitized and dramatized for outside consumption, but the real Brownsville of the 1970s. One of the most consistently dangerous neighborhoods in New York City, where violence was not dramatic or cinematic but simply ambient, part of the weather. Something you learned to read the signs of the way other people learn to read traffic or weather patterns. You learned early which streets to take and which to avoid, which hours were safe and which were not, which kinds of trouble were navigable and which were not. You learned to read people, quickly, accurately, without the luxury of being wrong.